emergency support delivered by local authorities plays a vital role in the social security system, and it's here to help families with these kind of like one-off shocks and sudden drops in income. Things like, you know, when you have the onset of a health problem or sort of some white goods breakdown. And in practice, that's not the role that it's playing anymore, because as Ruth said, in England, like a lot of areas don't even have this system of emergency support. Means that families aren't getting what they need when they're in these times of crisis, and they're not able to meet their basic needs, and this is driving the rising demand for food banks. But when we set out on this research, it was like 2 years ago, and the pandemic had started and a lot more money was being invested in local authorities to deliver emergency support like that, and that was great because it was a time of emergency. The last batch of funding that was given to local authorities, the Household Support Fund, wasn't for an emergency. It was to help councils, it was to help people cope with essentially a cut to another aspect of the social security system, which is equally as important, sort of basic universal credit, providing for the everyday needs rather than these one-off costs that emergency support is there. So I guess what I want to kind of highlight is what this research is trying to do is show a vision of what emergency support should be in order to drive down the need for food banks, but we can't end the need for food banks if we don't have both these components of the social security system working together in tandem. Emergency support isn't there to kind of cross-subsidize sort of other aspects of the social security system. We need both of them to be very strong. And the map that Kim's going to kind of give us today is very much around an emergency support system complemented by an effective social security system, and both of those need our attention. So yeah, sorry, I didn't offer much of a history lesson, but those are my kind of comments. Thanks, Ruth.
Okay, thank you. And I think it's very helpful to have that reminder that the emergency support given to local authorities wasn't actually for emergencies, and the importance of seeing what the position of local authority support in the context of the inadequacy of the social security system, the national social security system. And it's difficult to not to constantly kind of go back to that, especially at a time when everyday living costs are not being met by, and not going to be met by the uprating in April. Okay, so move on now to Sumi Rabindra Kumar from the Trussel Trust, who's Head of Research, Policy and Campaigns. Trying to see you on the screen.
Hello. I have a few slides, if you can bear with me sharing my screen. I will attempt to do this and just tell me if it's not working. Can you see some slides? Let me see if I can put it in slideshow mode. How's that? I will rely on someone shouting out. Lovely.
That's good.
Excellent. So I will start. And thanks very much for inviting us to speak. And really this report today is a real call to action, as Ruth has outlined, on the important part of emergency support, local emergency support, in playing a role with our vision of the UK without the need for food banks. And we definitely look forward to continuing to work in collaboration with both CPAG and the APPG at the Trussel Trust and the APPG on ending the need for food banks. And I know there's a lot of crossover between members there. So just to start a bit of background on the Trussel Trust, I'm sure some of you or lots of you will be familiar, but we support a network of over 1,200 food banks across the UK. We provide practical support through emergency food parcels, but also wider signposting and co-located support, particularly targeted at financial inclusion. And inevitably, we also push for the cross-party consensus we need to drive our vision forward to tackle the need for food banks. And just to really reiterate that our vision is really a reflection of the fundamental point that at the Trussel Trust, we don't want to see emergency food entrenched in the UK. And we believe that everyone should have the dignity of being able to afford food and other essentials. So to start then with a bit of context of people's financial starting points and what we're seeing in our network. Our most recent data is for April to September last year, and that showed well over 900,000 food parcels provided in just 6 months. So that's nearly 2,000 a day for children alone. And those figures were really the latest in a relentless rise over recent years in the need for food banks, as the figures show on the slide. And I really wanted to just make 3 key points there. One, our figures are the tip of the iceberg. So I know we have Mary on the panel. There are many independent food banks. We saw a proliferation of alternative food provision during the pandemic. So pop-ups, deliveries, pantries, and so on. So like I say, this is just the tip of the iceberg. 2, we very deliberately talk about need for food banks. I wanted to really underline that our independent modelling shows that the recent increases in food parcel uptake isn't about the number of food banks. If there was no food bank to go to, that need would be unmet. So we don't talk about food bank demand or food bank use. This is specifically food bank need. And thirdly, when we talk about need, we're talking specifically about economic need. So this isn't about food or access to food, but specifically about incomes and the extremely low incomes that people who are referred to food banks in our network are having to manage on. So our data shows pre-pandemic, people were trying to manage on, the average household was trying to manage on £57 a week. So for a household with children, that was about £8 a day. And to underline the severity of the poverty that we're talking about when we talk about trying to end the need for food banks or reduce the need for food banks, in early 2020, almost all, 95% of people referred to food banks would be classed as destitute. So that's not relative poverty or absolute poverty, but destitution, where they're unable to afford the 6 essentials we all need to eat, stay warm and dry, and keep clean. So in amongst that quite bleak picture, what is the role then for local crisis support? So I think relating to what Hannah was talking about, I think we should start, certainly for the Trussel Trust, to be really clear that all our data shows that the most immediate driver of problems with the national social security system is, the most immediate driver of need for food banks is problems with our national social security system, which mean that people simply can't make ends meet. So local crisis or transitionary support, as outlined in today's report, can't replace the system we've designed to support with living costs day in, day out. But what our data does show is that beyond national social security, drivers of food bank needs typically appear in a couple of forms. So one, around challenging life events, similar to what was outlined in today's report. So things like eviction, relationship breakdown, domestic abuse, having to flee domestic abuse and set up a new home, and a combination of those difficult life events and exhausted or inadequate local support. And that's really where local emergency support really comes into its own. And so particularly because local crisis support, we have seen where it works well, it has the capacity to really quickly and flexibly address short-term needs in a way that sort of typical national social security system administration can't. So when your freezer packs up, when there's an unexpected bill, food won't pay for the heating, it won't help set up a new home. Similarly, applying for, waiting for a first benefit payment to come through takes time that families simply don't have. And so what local support can do is offer the cash grants and wraparound support to help people bridge those short-term gaps, and so prevent either a difficult financial periods like school holidays becoming a crisis, or preventing a crisis deepening and avoiding a visit or an extra visit to a food bank. So local welfare assistance and similar local emergency support won't end the need for food banks alone, but it can play a really vital role in providing some financial resilience to weather those difficult experiences and shocks. And for us, it's really important that that sort of support provides a dignity of outcomes and the kind of specific targeted support that actually addresses the financial challenges being faced, so it isn't just a default to food, and helps ensure that food banks are the last port of call. And so I just wanted to leave you with some final thoughts on kind of the potential that we see in local emergency support. And first is around the lessons from the pandemic. where we really saw its vital role, as well as the drawbacks of the lack of a strategic approach to this kind of support. And there's a lot that's outlined helpfully in today's report, but we saw almost £1 billion of investment. We saw the recognition of the role of local government in mitigating and preventing destitution, and those were really important lessons of the value of investment and local government. But we also know that that spending wasn't very strategic, so it was unhelpfully targeted, it was time-bound, it didn't reflect the coordination and the infrastructure planning needed to get effective schemes off the ground, particularly in England, where there are such big gaps. And that as a result, we saw a real range of responses. So from rushed block grants to food banks, for example, completely missing the lessons that we just talked about around the potential for cash-based and wraparound support, because councils needed to get that money out the door quickly, to really kind of excellent and innovative uses of the money to boost local welfare assistance schemes and to boost preventative support. And then second, just to really emphasise that the Trussel Trust think that there's a real opportunity for policymakers to now lay the foundations for a new settlement for local emergency support across the UK, particularly in England, off the back of the pandemic and learning from Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And we hope that today's report is really the grounding to spur this forward. And for us, the things that we would want to particularly pull out are the need for long-term funding for local welfare assistance, the clarity needed on what local crisis support is for and what it can achieve, and also what it can't, so not replacing national social security. And there's an opportunity we have to consider how wider local support beyond local welfare assistance can be integrated into a more effective person and needs-led model, which delivers both a more dignified system of support for people, but also better value for money for government. And then finally, I couldn't leave without mentioning the cost of living crisis backdrop. Just as a kind of clarion call, December 2021 was one of our busiest on record, on a par with the height of the pandemic, where we saw record levels of need. And circumstances look set to get worse. And while we know that the scale of the problem needs the scale of our national social security system, I would urge our policymakers to use this as a reminder not to lose sight of those lessons that we've learned so recently on what emergency support locally can do, and the effectiveness it can provide as a tool against sort of deep poverty and debt in our communities. And so we really stand by the first step of a commitment to a comprehensive review with a view to set out a new vision for local crisis support, which would mean we could take a step further to ending the need for food banks and a society where everyone can afford the essentials. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Simi. That's really, really helpful, and very helpful to get the perspective of Trussel Trust. And I know there are other food bank. I mean, there may well be other food bank providers on the call. We do now have a view from the front line. The Tanya Whitfield, who's from the Hackney Food Bank, head of services there, to talk about what are the drivers of food bank use, why are people not accessing local welfare assistance, emergency assistance, and what needs to change. So Tanya, over to you.
Yeah, good morning. Bear with me, I'm not technical savvy, so I'm going to try and share screens. Oh goodness, I practice on Teams. Right, hang on, let me have a look. There we go. Can you see that? Can you see a screen shared?
Yes.
Yep, brilliant. Okay. Right, good morning. My name is Tanya Whitfield. I'm the head of services at Hackney Food Bank. I'm going to give you a bit of background about myself. I'm a lone mum. I'm a lone parent. When I was pregnant, I had a very bad pregnancy. I wasn't able to work. When my child was born, I wasn't able to return to work. It ended up with my property being repossessed. I had no signposting, no help. There was no food banks around in Hackney at that time, otherwise I would have needed them. So I want to skip forward from that to introduce you to this beautiful lady here. Her name's Halimo, and I am going to try and share with you now her own words. Please turn your volume up because you will need it, because she does speak quite quietly. Are you able to hear that?
Thank you very much for your time. If you'd just like to tell me what is the Hackney Food Bank? Thank you.
Sorry, were you able to hear that? Anyone?
Yes. Yes.
You could hear? Yeah, okay, sorry. Let me start that again.
Hi, Halimo. Thank you very much for your time. If you'd just like to tell me what is the Hackney Food Bank? Thank you so much, Anita. I experienced for Hackney Food Bank because I had a very, very hard time. My husband passed away. I have 6 kids. I couldn't work on that time. I was working, but I stopped because emotional and sickness of my husband and my mom. He was a long time sick, and my husband passed away. I couldn't work, and my own income stopped it, and I couldn't do anything, to be honest. And I get a lot of stress because of my kids, my income, my everything. And one of my friends told me there is a food bank, and I didn't know how to apply. She took me to the job center, and I asked them and saying, you're not eligible if you not get universal credit or kind of income. So I went back to home and I applied that. And after 1 month, I went back and settled up my universal credit. They gave me the food bank, and it was my first happiness of my life.
Okay, can you hear me back? Can you see this shared screen?
Not yet.
Yeah, you can see it or not? Am I not sharing now?
Can't see it yet.
Hang on,
yet.
sorry, bear with me. I told you I was pants at this. Hang on. No. There we go. Let's try again. Sorry, do bear with me. How's that?
We got it.
Brilliant. Sorry about that. I just fail to understand how in these days, this poor woman whose husband had died, she was left with 6 children, looking after an elderly, very poorly mum, had no idea about any of the benefits or assistance that was available to her. It's shocking. She was so thankful when she came to Food Bank. We were able to signpost her to the job centre and then get her the proper help that she needed. That woman cried. She was so thankful, and she'd gone without food for days. It's just it's not acceptable that happens. Yes, food banks, we've had exponential growth, but we need to find out more. I mean, I get out to the centres as much as I can, but we don't fully understand why people are coming. And we're partnering with the Trussel Trust, and we're doing a huge research project with Ipsos, and that will hopefully give us much more information that we need to find out why people are actually accessing food banks. Hang on, let me move on to the next one. Okay. No, okay, hang on. This is going very wrong. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, this is really going wrong. I'm having problems trying to move the screens down. when you ask people about local welfare assistance, they're not aware that it exists. I had one person, when I asked them about it, tell me, isn't that something that happens in America? When you try and make a phone call to find out, it's not easily discovered on the local council's website. If you have to get anywhere, you have to go through customer services. I personally tried it, and I was on hold for 1 hour, 59 minutes, 59 seconds. The call got cut off, bang on the 2 hours. If I was a beneficiary with no credit on my phone or very little credit on my phone, I couldn't have made that phone call. Now, I do understand that they are experiencing COVID just like everybody else, and there's staff shortages, but more has to be done. Being put on hold for 2 hours is just, it's not okay. What has to change? We have to end the 5-week delay in universal credit. When you're put into that waiting period, you're offered loans, but those loans have to be paid back, and it puts you into, you're in the red already, aside from all the other things, bills that are mounting up. So the universal credit delay has to change. The loans, if it is going to continue to be a loan, then it has to be taken back over a smaller amount over a longer period, and there has to be a support network in place to help people. It's scary. People's anxiety through these times are going through the roof, and there's no one there to help them. There has to be meaningful engagement with the job centres. Again, I know they rely on agency workers, and the time and money isn't what it should be, but there has to be proper engagement, and people with lived experience. Sanctions are a huge problem with a lot of our beneficiaries. I've had several beneficiaries explain to me that they've been sanctioned because they weren't aware of a new appointment, and they weren't aware of it, so they didn't turn up. They weren't aware of it because they had no data on their mobile, so they had no notification that there was a new message. They weren't able to check it, and they were sanctioned, so they were left without anything. How on earth is that ever okay? And trust, we need to build trust. The number of beneficiaries who come to our doors and they don't want to engage because they've just been let down and let down and let down by so many people. We have to find a way of engaging with our beneficiaries at all levels. When someone has lived experience, you feel comfortable and you can ask questions in a way that if you haven't got that lived experience, you just can't. There's no trust in authorities. There's no trust in local government. There's no trust in the local councils. We need to build that trust. It's just wrong. So we need to get people with lived experience making the decisions, helping people on the front line, helping people in all the different offices and all the different help sectors that are available. Sorry, I get quite passionate about that and I get carried away. So yeah, we just need lived experience in all levels, true understanding, and someone that actually cares.
Have you finished, Tanya?
I have, yeah, sorry.
No, thank you very much indeed. And I think it's really important to have that reminder about the need for lived experience to inform policy making, policy implementation. And I was struck also both you and Sumi, I think, talked about the importance of people being treated with dignity. That is so often forgotten in the sort of kind of bureaucracies, and that story about being held for over an hour, 1 hour 59 minutes on the phone and not getting through. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Okay, we've got a break now. Those first few contributions very helpfully have set the context for the report. And before we move on to talk about the report itself, there is a sort of pause to allow for any questions. I think because there are so many people, I can't see everybody on the screen, but I think if you put your yellow hand up, then you automatically come to the head of the queue, so to speak. So I do see you. So if anyone wants to ask a question or make a point on what's already been said, please use the reactions button and the raise hand on that, and then I'll ask you to speak. Does anyone wish to? No? Marjorie Bahaj. Marjorie, go ahead.
As I've been listening to this, and by the way, I'm a retired nurse and midwife. I live in the London Borough of Hillingdon. Anna has highlighted a very major point about how the system is not working together. The asynchrony is causing problems where people are falling through holes in a system. And I'm actually hearing exactly the same problem from our local elected councillors of the London Borough of Hillingdon, that departments are not talking to one another. So we really need to create a stronger interweaved system to support people. I also feel that what is coming out very loud and clear is that we need to develop something where there's a firm platform of support for people, for everybody, and that is a continuous for whatever situation anybody is facing. So that's something that we need to look at, is developing a firm platform of support for people to be cushioned with.
Thank you. I think that's a really important point. I've kind of become increasingly conscious from various research, lived experience, not my own, I have to say, but listening to people, the importance of security, and the way you've put it is I think it's a very good way of putting a firm platform of support. People don't have a firm platform of support, and so they don't know, they're constantly sort of tripping over in a sense because of the holes that you've identified. And I just think we need to put much greater emphasis on financial security, and I think its importance to people has come out very strongly from, for instance, the COVID Realities project that CPAG was involved in, and other research into universal credit. And so things like the 5-week wait, which Tanya referred to, sanctions, all those contribute to the insecurity that people feel. Is there anyone else who wants to come in at this point? Because if not, I think it probably makes sense to move on to hear about the report. It's Talulia from the Salvation Army.
Hi, I just wondered, I'm aware that the National Food Strategy White Paper is expected to be revealed this year, and I just wondered how this report could possibly feed into that, in terms of, we've discussed the kind of drivers which lead people to require the need for a food bank, but in terms of preventative measures, how can we make food more affordable? And I just wondered whether there would be any kind of consultation process for those with frontline service experience to feed into that strategy.
Thank you. Wayne Green.
Yeah, hello. Listening to this, I've heard over the years the same sort of similar debates, but the new phenomenon of food banks and different channels of food banks to low-cost supermarkets, etc., seems to me being embedded in society as part of the welfare system, also system. My one thinking is, I think is actually we need a completely new system. We actually need a citizen's income. That's really what we need now. Right across the board, and we need to have a look at the DWP as an organisation itself. Maybe it needs to be scrapped and come up with a new system, because the biggest burden to social security is the administration of it all as well, and the overlapping of this. We're working together. I've heard this over 20 years, departments working together. They're obviously not, and we've got to take into account this is ideological what's going on. as well. The United Nations came here and did a report on poverty, and it was a damning report saying it can change. It's an ideological process that works.
Yes.
Thank you, Wayne. I'm sure at some point we could have a discussion about those kind of wider issues, but we do want to keep today focused on this particular issue of local welfare assistance, which obviously has to be understood in that wider context, but we do need to just discuss the report itself focuses and is very clear that it can't take account of those wider issues. I maybe that we can pick up at the end the important point that Tanya made about the national food strategy and how this might feed into it. I don't know whether CPAG has thought about, you know, sending a copy of the report to those involved in developing the response. I think it's due actually quite soon, the response to the national food strategy. But anyway, I'd like at this point to move on and talk about the report itself, which is a sort of centerpiece of today's meeting. And therefore our Kimberly McIntosh, who's Senior Policy and Research Officer at CPAG, to give us an overview of the report. Kimberly, thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Can everyone hear me? Can I see a thumbs up? Fantastic. So I'm also sharing my screen, so I will just need confirmation that everyone can see that. All good? Can we see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay.
Slide. Yes.
Great. So hi everyone, I'm Kimberly McIntosh and I'm Senior Policy and Research Officer on the Ending the Need for Food Banks project. And thank you so much to all the speakers that have really laid out why this work is so important, particularly Tanya's moving contribution. So thank you for that. So I'm just going to very briefly talk about the Ending the Need for Food Banks project and the recommendations that we've come up with. So very briefly on the project, it's a 2-year project funded by Financial Fairness Trust, and the project focuses on what we can do to improve emergency support as it currently exists, so it reduces the need for food banks in England, Scotland and Wales. And we picked England, Scotland and Wales because that is where CPAG currently has staff. So unfortunately, we didn't get to include Northern Ireland in this study. And the aim of the project was to develop a long-term vision for emergency support and build some recommendations on how we can move towards that vision. And to do that, we held 4 policy workshops with experts. We had 2 citizens' juries, one in Scotland and one in England, where we had participants from across the country. And we had input from an advisory group, some of whom are on this call. So thank you for all your help over the past 2 years. And we engaged with participants in other projects as well. So the COVID Realities project that Ruth mentioned earlier and other CPAG projects. So we've split our recommendations into short and medium and long term. And as was mentioned earlier, emergency support should be stepping in to help with some of those short-term events that bring with them additional costs, and can tip families into destitution. But as we've heard in the first few presentations, it is doing a lot more than that, but also not stepping in when it should be. It's trying to pick up slack in other parts of the social security system. And so we know that we need wider reform of social security more widely in order to manage that. But through our research, we found that we did some interviews with people who had tried to access emergency support and hadn't been able to. So one of our interviewees, who we call Hannah, but all the names have been changed, had 2 young children and her washing machine broke down. And because she's on a persistently low income, it was difficult for her to save up for one. But emergency support should have stepped in and it didn't. Emergency support should also act as an income stabilizer when there are unpredictable life events that lead to an income shock or a drop in income. And someone that we interviewed called Leo, he had a heart attack. He wasn't able to work anymore in high stress work. he thought he'd be able to find work quite easily, but then the pandemic hit and he found it very difficult to find work. Then there was a mistake with his energy provider, and suddenly he wasn't able to meet the costs of bills or food, and the family were pushed to the brink. Again, this is when emergency support should have stepped in, but unfortunately it didn't. And so, as we can see on the slide, someone from one of our other CPAG projects was saying that sudden expenses or challenges can happen to anyone. So we need to make sure that there is help out there. It's not about people making poor decisions or being irresponsible. It's for emergencies, and the death of a spouse, the loss of a job, losing your home, all of these things can happen to anyone, and we need to make sure that the right support is there. So for our vision of emergency support, we considered what should change so that it's better meeting people's needs and preventing hardship. And so we proposed payments that should cover certain events. One, key development milestones that often lead to a short-term increase in costs associated with raising children. And we can learn from the Best Start grants in Scotland and Sure Start maternity grants in England and how those could work. There should also be payments that cover lumpy costs. So that's big ticket, high cost items that you need to pay for once in a while, but they're quite difficult to save up for if you're on a persistently low income. Then there's transitional payments that would cover the costs associated with a life transition. So things like trying to set up a home after a period of homelessness, leaving care or prison, or leaving domestic abuse. And then finally, emergency payments that cover the cost of essentials following an unexpected crisis or life event, such as a health condition, a bereavement, separation, or divorce. So how do we move towards this system? So in the short to medium term, we need to get a better sense of what's working well, what isn't working, and what's happening on the ground. And Sumi mentioned earlier a commitment to having reviews of emergency support in different nations, and that's something that we argue for as well. The Scottish Government has already commissioned a review into how the Scottish Welfare Fund is functioning, and the Welsh Government is in the process of reviewing the Welsh benefit system as a whole, how it could be devolved, and we believe that the Discretionary Assistance Fund should be included in that review. And the UK government should also commit to a review of local welfare in England. Improving the delivery of emergency support in line with best practice is also key. And we'll have more of that in the second part of this event today in the following presentations. But something that kept coming up in our policy workshops is that there were similar issues around delivery and best practice across Scotland, Wales, and England. And so this quote on the slide here kind of illustrates some of those issues. So this was from a workshop in Wales about the Discretionary Assistance Fund, and the participant said the 48-hour turnaround period for the DAF is quite long for someone already at breaking point. DAF payments don't take into account the size of the household. The same award amount is given whether you have 2 or 5 children, and food banks are able to provide vouchers within 2 hours. So we propose that where possible, awards would reflect each family's circumstances and family size, that they would inform applicants about the reasons when an award is rejected and provide them with information of follow-on support, and clearly explain the rationale behind whatever decision is made. More advertising in places that people go. It was mentioned earlier by Tanya that people aren't necessarily aware that this support is on offer. And so advertising needs to go to where people are. We also need strong referral pathways that divert people towards financial support and away from food aid where that's appropriate. And where possible, reducing the time between an application for emergency support being made and the award being given. But this can't be achieved without longer term funding, but also particularly in England, building more consistency in the delivery of local welfare. It's been mentioned a few times already that is postcode lottery and what is on offer, and some local authorities in England don't have any provision. The End Furniture Poverty recently sent out lots of FOI requests and found that an estimated 1 in 5 local authorities don't have any local welfare support on offer. The per capita spending on the Scottish Welfare Fund and the Discretionary Assistance Fund is much higher than local welfare schemes in England as it stands. And this means that the current offer is fragmented across local authorities. There's also different eligibility criteria, different names, and different per capita spend across local authorities, which leads to a lack of consistency. So in the medium term, we suggest that DWP, LGA and local authorities work together to produce a shared outcomes framework for tackling destitution and hardship. These outcomes would be set nationally to try and improve consistency and delivery across local authorities, but councils would determine how they'd be best met. But these outcomes would be careful to recognise that different programmes can have a cumulative effect on outcomes when trying to design that framework. And we recommend that guidance is provided that outlines what constitutes hardship support and can set some minimum standards that local authorities must meet to create more consistency. In the longer term, we think that we should work with service users to establish a new name for local welfare, so that there's a consistent name and one that is accessible and easily understood. That data should be published on the delivery of local welfare to get more of a sense of the national picture, and to create a national strategy for local welfare in England with statutory guidance, which would build towards having a statutory duty on local authorities to deliver local welfare in the longer term. But this wouldn't be possible without a longer term funding settlement for local welfare. So as was mentioned earlier, the pots of time-limited funding that have been made available throughout the pandemic and currently due to end with the Household Support Fund next week, recognised how vital emergency support can be and the role that it can play in supporting people facing hardship. So as the quote on the slide illustrates, a workshop participant said that there needs to be assurance that the funding is not just a one-off and short term, as that makes it really hard to plan for longer term solutions. And as Ruth mentioned, the cost of living crisis is going to continue to bite, and it's likely that even more people are going to be in need of support. So in the short term, there needs to be annual funding to local authorities in England dedicated to tackling destitution and hardship. And then in the medium term, multi-year funding commitments so that it's easier for local authorities to plan. And to end, it was made really clear by participants in our citizens' juries that dignity and choice were integral to a renewed emergency support provision. And as one of the quotes on the slide outlines, people asking for emergency help have been through enough without being made to feel like we don't trust them to choose the right baked beans. So we advocate working towards a cash-first approach, which I know we're also going to hear more about in the following presentations. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. That's a very good summary, I think, of the what's being proposed, and it fits in well with some of the points that were made earlier. Move straight on to Mary McGinley, who's chair of the Helensburgh Food Bank with Lessons from Scotland.
Good morning, everybody. As a volunteer from an independent community food bank in Helensburgh in Argyll and Bute, we've been involved in promoting a cash-first approach because we believe that access to food is a basic human right, and that in the UK, people should have sufficient income to give them the dignity of buying food for themselves and their families. Having to rely on charitable food aid leads to a loss of self-esteem due to the stigma associated with using a food bank. In common with food banks across the country, we have experienced a year-on-year increase in the number of people attending our food bank. 2 years ago, we worked together with the Independent Food Aid Network, IFAN, to develop a leaflet which was building on work previously done by Menu for Change in Dundee. The Worrying About Money leaflet is a roadmap to help people identify the key issues leading them to attend the food bank. It then provides them with options to address the problem and gives contact details of local services that could help. The leaflet contains information on the Scottish Welfare Fund and how to obtain a crisis grant. In 2019, a report on the Scottish Welfare Grant highlighted that many people were unaware of its existence and that some councils were reluctant to advertise it for fear of being unable to meet demand. The leaflet encourages people to seek a benefit review to ensure that they're receiving all of the benefits to which they're entitled. It also provides details on how to access hardship payments, benefit advance, and home energy advice. Contact details where they can get help, for example, the Scottish Citizens Advice, Local Housing Association, and Welfare Rights Officer are also listed. IFAN supplied all food aid providers with the leaflets, and Argyll and Bute Council distributed it widely across its networks to all, and also recently to all households with their annual council tax notice. IFAN is supporting the development of the Worrying About Money leaflets across Scotland, England, and Wales. The leaflet, although following the same recognisable template, is customised to the local council area and signposting people to local known services. The leaflet has given volunteers greater confidence in offering help to those attending because they can signpost people in the knowledge that the agency or service involved is already committed to a cash first approach and is willing to help those who contact them. In Argyll and Bute, the partnership working developed with the leaflet was to prove even more productive when the Scottish Government allocated significant flexible funds to each council area to tackle financial insecurity and support households with food and fuel insecurities. The Argyll and Bute Community Food Forum, which has representatives from all of the voluntary food aid providers in Argyll and Bute, plus Bute Advice Agency, worked with officers from the council to facilitate the introduction of the Argyll and Bute Flexible Food Fund. The drivers for this were an increasing number of people looking for hardship-related support, an active community food forum, also the experience that the council had gained in the provision of food parcels to vulnerable during the pandemic, and also the clear need for collaboration on crisis support and provision of welfare advice. Our key principles were cross-sector collaborative working and a joined-up approach. We went for an income-based response with cash-first principles and adopted a health and well-being approach, recognising that food's essential for health, and so is lack of stress. We incentivised engagement with advice agencies within the programme. The eligibility criteria was you had to be 16 years or over and resident within the Argyll and Bute council area, experiencing financial hardship, and in receipt of a qualifying benefit or beyond an equivalent low income. The payments were set at between £80 and £530, depending on family size. There was 2 payments to be made available a month apart. The second payment due if they engaged with the welfare services to have a benefits review. 96% of those receiving the first payment did engage with the welfare rights advisor and received a second payment. So for a larger family, that was 2 payments of £530. So in terms of key achievements, within Argyll and Bute in this programme, there was a client gain of £1.25 million. That was with flexible food payments and other applicable benefits. There were 964 applications submitted and 648 were successful in receiving 2 payments. 307 people were not eligible for the Flexible Food Fund, but they, however, received a benefits review and welfare rights support. We believe the programme helps to mitigate child poverty by ensuring that there's maximising of income and that full welfare benefits are being received. It also strengthened relationships between public sector, voluntary and community groups. The Flexible Food Fund is going to continue through till March 2023. So we believe that this cash first approach, which incentivises welfare rights and benefit support, has helped to maximise income for those that are eligible. However, despite this example of good practice and the success of the collaborative working in producing the Worrying About Money leaflets and implementing the Flexible Food Fund, we are aware that the underlying problem of unrelenting poverty due to low income needs to be addressed if we are to end the need for food banks. The Scottish Welfare Fund, emergency power top-ups, flexible food funds, and help through benefit review provide only a short-term solution for some. Many people who need help don't seek it, and we're already seeing people returning to the food bank who have exhausted their access to 2 flexible food fund payments, the Scottish Welfare Fund grant and home energy vouchers. More needs to be done to secure the real living wage. Welfare benefits require to be set at a realistic level and be available at the time of need with minimum delay. Otherwise, those experiencing food insecurity will have to continue to turn to charitable food aid to feed themselves and their families, or go hungry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. I always feel slightly envious when I hear about Scotland, because although, as you said, the underlying problems continue, I mean, it's such a good example of what can be done within the current context. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. I'm sorry I had to, in the middle of all that, vote. We still vote on our phones, and there was suddenly a clanging of bells to tell us that a vote was going on. So I was just slightly preoccupied for a bit of that, but it was very, very interesting. Final contribution is to provide the local authority perspective. Jill Wilson, who's service manager for the Homes and Money Hub Community Solutions in the London Borough of Barking. And we'll talk about some of the barriers to setting up and delivering local welfare assistance and also best practice. Jill, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Hello, everybody. I'll just share my screen. Right, let me just try and do that. Sorry, looks like I'm having a bit of problem as well. That's it. And you can see my screen, yeah? So hello everybody, as I say, I'm the service manager in Homes and Money Hub, and we've been at the front line throughout COVID, and have been heavily involved in using the local welfare support. Just a little bit about Barking and Dagenham. As you can see, we experience very poor outcomes. It's a very deprived borough, and that is unfortunately across the board. I'm within a department called Community Solutions, which is a people-facing department, and our mission is very much about making a difference and ensuring nobody is left behind. So the headlines, financial hardship funds for the last 2 years, we've had 8,000 applications, 5,000 awards for an amount of 4 million. Grants for this year are still being spent, but unfortunately applications have had to stop because we've had so many applications, they're working through a backlog. We've supported between 9,000 and 12,000 free school meal households during the half-term break, and we've actually used 1,478 food bank vouchers. Now these are mainly Trussel Trust that we work closely with in partnership, and also the source food top-up. So if food banks are not available, we also have a homeless charity who provides a pit stop to the homeless, but also provides support for sort of out of hours top-ups when people are in desperate need, and this is all through donations. So with the financial support that the money we were given from government, we introduced a whole range of new initiatives. The Asda grocery vouchers were brilliant. Asda, we chose Asda because it's covered with all parts of the borough, so in both in Barking and in Dagenham. These people, we were able to issue those to people quite easily through just sending an email, get it on the phone, so that there was no stigma around it. They just used them as vouchers going into Asda for whatever they needed. We used PayPoint utility vouchers for gas and electricity, and we've now moved to post office utility vouchers purely because some of the providers didn't allow PayPoint, and one of them was British Gas, so post office is used by everyone. Use of cash perks to provide the hardship fund. So we worked in conjunction with hardship. So we provided the Asda vouchers for short-term emergency food until the hardship funds were able to come through to the residents. We used cash perks so that was money directly into the bank account, or if somebody didn't have a bank account, they could go and get it from any of the high street cash points. We also, as I said, used the food top-ups. That was an excellent initiative. And we also use food support. Now, the Homes and Money Hub, we are a service to support people in financial difficulty. So we look at the holistic issues within the household. We don't look at just council debt. We look at everything and why people are in that situation, with the aim to enable them to become financially stable. So while we're doing that, one of the things that we do is subsidise the food shop on a weekly basis. So residents can come in, it's set up like a supermarket, they can choose what they want, up to a cost of about £20, but we usually give them a lot more than that. That does include fresh food and meat and frozen things as well. And we also work with our social care colleagues. We provide food support. Social care actually pay for this, but what we do is ensure that those people referred for the food support are actually supported to enable them to become financially stable. So we wrap around our support around the customers. So really interested to read your ending the use of food bank report. I thought it was really excellent, and just working through the recommendations from a Barking and Dagenham recommendation 1, which is review the emergency support provision. We've been trying for absolute years to encourage data sharing from government departments such as DWP, particularly in respect of universal credit. We've come a long way to identify our own most vulnerable in Barking and Dagenham from our own data, and I will go into that a little bit more, because there was quite a lot of comments about, how do we target those people who may not come forward, may not know about what's being offered? How do we identify the most vulnerable? And that's exactly what we've been working on, and I'll talk about that in a little bit later. But we do realise there are significant gaps in the data that we have, because we're not getting data from DWP with universal credit. So that is a barrier. Looking at recommendation 2, which is improve the emergency support delivery in line with best practice. We were really pleased that we found that we were either working in line with those recommendations or working towards them. And we would be very, very keen to explore these further if we were able to get the additional funds from government, and very much around some of your later recommendations about having something that is, you know, having the funding available to us regularly. Recommendation 3, to improve consistency across local authorities. These are the discussions that we at Barking and Dagenham would certainly like to be involved in, working alongside the government, the LGA, people, you know, residents who are using the service. We'd certainly like to be involved in that going forward, and I think that's a really, really positive move and recommendation there. And then in respect of recommendation 4, so this would be a dream for us, deliver a long-term funding settlement for emergency support. We absolutely would support this, and precisely as you described, this will enable us to look at our short and long-term solutions. It's very, very difficult to distribute the money when we don't know how long we've got it. We've only, in some cases, we've had to put our own money up front, not very risky, not knowing whether you know, we were actually what level of funds we were going to get to from the government, but we've had to do this because the need was so great. Having something where we can work, you know, long-term solutions will enable us to get more staff so that we can distribute the money quicker, and you know, and really work towards what the residents need in Barking and Dagenham. So just going back to recommendation 1, where you were talking around using our data to identify those most vulnerable. This is exactly what we're doing at the moment, and we've been working on a project to identify from all of the council data to identify residents in need and needing financial support. And our modelling actually suggests that out of a cohort of 1,000 highly indebted households, successfully addressing the financial risk factors for the cohort would have the benefits as below. So you've got, you know, 258 households would be who are at risk of eviction, and we would prevent homelessness. We would reduce the number of children presenting to children's services, and even there will be a reduction in the risk of unplanned hospital admissions. So, you know, this is what we've got from our analysis that we've been doing so far. So as you can see, from around 300 households out of 1,000 would be prevented from experiencing wider issues and creating high cost demand in other council services, which then would mean that we will be able to use that funds into supporting residents experiencing financial issues. So where are we going in the future? Well, we haven't got any more funds after the 31st of March, but we are going to carry on with our targeted work, looking at residents in financial difficulty, and this will mean that we'll have less capacity, because what we do in the Homes and Money Hub, we have a drop in, and residents can access us either by walk-ins, they can phone, or they can email. So we have quite a large capacity, and it's very much advertised throughout Barking and Dagenham. But we know that will reduce if we do more of the targeted stuff. We're only a small team, but we feel the benefits of reaching those that have not previously came to us for whatever reason is you know, will outweigh that risk, because we are also developing community hubs. And this is very much going to be around setting up money champions. Now, I think, as you mentioned previously, getting people with lived experience involved is very, very important. And this is what we want from our money champions. working within the community for the community and linking in with us, so we'd be able to provide them help and advice. We've also developed a community, there will be a community bank coming into Barking and Dagenham later in the summer, but we've also developed a web platform which is Barking and Dagenham Money, which is excellent. You might like to Google it. This provides residents with tailored financial information, advice and guidance, and it will support residents and those that support them. So we've been working very closely with the voluntary sector and working out how we can support them to support the residents that they're working with, because they don't want necessarily to do referrals to us. They would rather support the residents themselves, but just want the advice. So we've developed this website so that they can get information from the website, but also close links with us. So there's just a phone call to us, get some advice on how they can support the resident that they're working with. And just really just a sort of an outcome from one of the targeted people that we did on the project. We identified this guy from the data. He's had high council tax and rent arrears. He also had risks around mental health. He was victim of crime and he has adult social care needs. The work that we did with the customer was to apply for a PIP because he didn't have any, he wasn't accessing any PIP support, so that it maximised his income there. We set up a payment plan with his council tax of £20 a month that was affordable for him. We cleared a significant amount of his arrears through our DHP, and we also he was awarded our council tax support. So we asked the resident, you know, why hadn't you sort of contacted us? And he just basically said, you know, I wasn't able to. And he gave his reasons here. You know, the guy had been a victim of an attack in 2003, had been stabbed, had lots and lots of injuries from that. And he wasn't able to make those contacts. He wasn't able to read properly. He really did need that very much tailored support. And just some feedback from our residents, which was someone said we might not be the NHS.
Could you, sorry, Jill, could you wind up quickly, please? Because we're
I'll leave it there. You can see what our feedback is, and then just any questions. So I'll just come back now. I think I've stopped sharing. So
great.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Again, it's really, really encouraging to know that there is such good practice going on in some areas at least. Okay, we've got about just under 15 minutes now for questions, comments, thoughts about the recommendations in the report. I don't know if there are any parliamentarians on the call, because parliamentarians get the priority at an APPG meeting. So are there any parliamentarians who wish to say anything before I open it up more generally? Don't think so. Wayne, I think you may have a legacy hand up, so perhaps you could put it down. Anyone who hasn't yet spoken, who'd like to speak, if you'd like to use reactions and put your virtual hand up. To say, it can be a question or it can be a comment on the report's recommendations or anything else that you've heard. Gareth Evans from Cash Perks.
Hi, it's been a really, really interesting session and builds on lots of work that we've been doing around how councils and the voluntary sector can all work together to get cash payments to people. But I still think I still think cash is still a dirty word within a lot of organisations, right through from councils, but also frontline organisations. There's still a mistrust of giving, cash payments for some reason to individuals who are probably best placed to understand what their financial needs are, what best can help that household to address their challenges. and, you know, I mean, give them the dignity to choose that payment. So I think there's more got to be done, and sessions like this is really helpful, but there's got to be more to break down some of those misunderstandings, that some of that, I think it's just a bit of stereotyping about poor people and how they're going to mismanage funds if we dare to give them a cash payment. So I think it's definitely working. Thanks to all the organisations involved today for helping raise the awareness of that.
Thank you. A. McDowell. Yep.
Hi, yeah, my name's Adrian. I work at the GLA. So I've got quite a lot of thoughts on this because I'm new to the GLA. A couple of weeks ago, I come from a local government background, which had this like in my brief. Firstly, comments, I guess. I just welcome the report and the framework, especially around the outcomes, and GLA with London councils is looking at this as well in a similar way. So it would be good to link up the report and other work going on to kind of understand like what local welfare assistance is for, and also taking a strategic approach to it. And the review, I think, is all very welcome, because I think there are, sorry, this is where it's more comments, and I'll be quick and then get to a question. I think, like people have said, and the report makes clear, it's not clear what local welfare assistance is for. A lot of the time it's picking up the slack when it is effective. From the outcomes I've seen in local government, it's very unclear whether it's, you know, what's it for? Is it for homelessness prevention? Is it like, it's really a bit of a mess, to be honest. And I take the points that others made about the fact that this is maybe masking the worst effects of other policies. So I think there's something there about like learning about what's going wrong for people as well, I think, and then trying to influence at the higher level and universal credit and the awards and sanctions and so on, to just keep making the case that this is, you know, kind of the emergencies people being pushed into. In terms of, I'll get to my questions now. In terms of the scope and kind of touching it with Barking and Dagenham at the end there, I wondered about what is in scope for local welfare assistance. Is it just the formal scheme itself, or is it wider things like DHP, like council tax reduction and all the rest of it in one package, or is it just the schemes itself? So that's one question. And then, yeah, the other question was more around that point about the recommendations and just building in like learning what's going wrong for people and for residents, and just making sure that's in there, which I think it is. But so those are my two questions: what's in scope, and, you know, how are we learning from what's going wrong?
So thank you, Adrian. I'll take any more questions first and then ask for responses. Beth from the Food Ethics Council.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for all your speakers today. It's just really struck by the kind of desperate scale of the need, but also the real importance of kind of solidarity amongst you all in terms of the work that you're doing, which is really wonderful and important, I think. I think the kind of key thing for me, we've been doing some work around building community food resilience, which is about kind of recognising in the short term that that there are lots of things in place that in the future we'd hope weren't there. So how to make them, like food banks and so on, how to make them as dignified, as decent, as kind as possible, but at the same time acknowledging those kind of big structural systemic changes that need to happen, and certainly not letting any of that off the hook. So I mean, that's a kind of a general, just we completely agree with all of what you're saying. I understand the rationale for the report not including Northern Ireland. So I should say I work right across the UK, but I live in Northern Ireland, so I'm a bit obsessed. So I'm just interested, why I completely understand and why it doesn't include Northern Ireland, whether kind of what links you have with Northern Ireland, if any, yeah, I'd just love to know a bit more about that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Kim, do you want to respond to those points? And then if anyone else wants to come in, please feel free to do so, but I'll ask Kim first.
Thank you for all those questions and comments. And Gareth, I completely agree with you on that. And so I just think as many of us as possible need to keep continuing to make the case for cash first where we can. Andy, it would be great to meet at some point after this to talk about how we could work together. But you're definitely right. In one of the workshops that we did, it became really clear that we need a definition of local welfare that we can all agree on before we can then move forward and start advocating for change, that there isn't like a clear definition on what it's for. And it is quite tricky trying to demarcate that when we are within a system where we know it's picking up the slack from other parts of the social security system, and we also don't want it to stop doing that if it's supporting people right now in the context that we're in. And so it's just something that needs to be, I think, worked out together as a group, but we can meet to discuss that after this. Also, in terms of kind of, do we want to also look at DHP, local welfare, council tax reduction? One of the arguments in the report for having a review is also to look at how those could fit together potentially into a package of support, and also considering no interest loans, which have trials going on at the moment, and how those all dovetail together. It's something that needs to be have further investigation, and that's something that we call for as part of that review process. As well as what's working and what isn't, and trying to find out more about. So we know that Jill's doing amazing work and her team's doing amazing work. What other local authorities are doing work like that as well, and like being able to share that out would also come under this review process. Beth, in terms of links with Northern Ireland, and I might call on Hannah to correct me if I am wrong here. I believe we did do some work relatively recently in Northern Ireland, but it was quite a small project and not to do with local welfare, and that was kind of potentially the beginning of more work in that area. Does that sound right, Hannah?
Yeah, no, so just to sort of I think part of the reason why we didn't do anything in Northern Ireland on this project was working with our colleagues in Wales and Scotland. We kind of realised, sort of, I'm in the London office, and just quite how out of depth we are sort of talking about things in Scotland and Wales without having people on the ground who can, like, you know, all of these things get really granular. It's really useful to be able to have that, and we don't have that in Northern Ireland, which is why they want in this report. But I think actually a lot of the lessons that we were talking about with England actually apply sort of in other areas as well, at least in principle. And yeah, no, we sort of recently have done some work in Northern Ireland partnering with Save the Children, because they've got a quite a good, you know, they've got people there and they know the granular stuff. And if Save the Children was doing anything on local welfare, or anyone in Northern Ireland was doing stuff on local welfare assistance or emergency support, we'd be very up for kind of like seeing how our report could feed into that, because that would be great. We just we sort of didn't want to do it if we weren't going to do it properly. I think that was it, really.
Sumi, you wanted to come in, and then I think we're going to have to call it a day.
Yes, just briefly, definitely agree with Kim's response around kind of the priority of cash first and the clarity of definition of the kind of purpose of emergency support locally, and also to flag that we're also looking at some research looking at what the kind of cases for more integrated support, so picking up some of this issues around sort of DHPs and interaction with local council support, And those are the forms of local crisis support that address sort of similar problems. And to flag that our network is UK wide, and we have experts on the ground who've been informing local schemes or national schemes in Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, and we're hoping to pull some of that learning together as part of a toolkit project that we're looking at aimed at ending destitution locally, so very much informed by the work that CPAG has done, but also the lessons from our network and lessons across the UK, and hopefully we can share more of those findings in the coming months.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think we're running out of time. I'm very grateful to everyone who has contributed, all the speakers, all those who've attended. There was a point in the chat which we weren't able to address, and I think the person had to leave early, but that participants might like to think about, and that is implications for asylum seekers and refugees, and where they fit into the proposed new scheme. So I just mentioned that because it's an issue very much on, well, I think on a lot of our minds at present. But I think it's been a very useful session. I've not managed to read the whole of the report yet, but I've read the executive summary. I think it's a very, very important contribution that CPAG has made with the report. And I hope it can lead to some change, and perhaps I can talk to Zane and others about what we can be doing in Parliament to push and push the ideas that the report's proposing, and try and get some response from ministers on it. So thanks again, everybody. Thanks again to Zane for organising it, and I hope you all have a good rest of the day. Thanks. Bye.